Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here for the next 2024 CEBRA webinar series, or as we like to call them, CEBRAnars. My name is Richard Kane. I'm the Principal Director of the Biosecurity Innovation Research and Education branch here in the department. Before we formally kick off, I just want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the lands we are meeting on, and recognise any other people or families with connections to the lands of the ACT and the region. Also wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and the region, and extend that out to the recognition to the traditional custodians of all other lands on which our staff and participants are gathered here today, as well as to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today's CEBRAnar. Just before we begin, I know a few other people have heard that who've been nice enough to join us a little bit earlier, but just make sure your microphones are on mute and your cameras are off. There is a function at the top of the screen there so you can put in comments as you go along if there's anything that particularly takes your interest during the presentation. But at the end, we will throw it back out to questions. You can also use the function of putting your hand up there as well. So save it up and we can answer those questions at the end. For all the newcomers, the Centre of Excellence for Biosecurity Risk Analysis, or CEBRA, is a long-standing biosecurity research initiative, plays a vital role in providing the Australian and New Zealand governments with expert biosecurity risk analysis and advice that helps inform a range of biosecurity risk management activities. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Dr. Ariel Kruger to present on the topic of a novel structured elicitation method, for identifying the collective wisdom of an expert community. Dr. Kruger is a research fellow at the Hunt Laboratory for Intelligence Studies, and for the last few years has been working on methods for synthesizing qualitative expert judgments. His background is in the philosophy of science, and research interests are in intelligence analysis, biosecurity, amongst other things. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kruger, who's going to be presenting to you. And as I said, at the end, there'll be plenty of time for questions. Over to you, Dr. Kruger. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rich, for that lovely introduction. As you said, I'm Ari Kruger, a research fellow at the Hunt Lab for Intelligence Studies. The lab is a small team of researchers housed within CEBRA, and we work on problems that are related to intelligence analysis. And as some of you might know, biosecurity is also very similar to intelligence analysis in a lot of respects. So hopefully a lot of what we'll be talking today, you'll be able to see how it might translate into your own kind of area. So one of the areas that we're interested in is improving how groups come together to solve a common problem. And that's essentially what an expert elicitation is. It's getting a group of experts together, structuring their communication, and synthesizing their responses into some kind of final answer. So today I'll be talking to you about a new expert elicitation method we've developed at the Hunt Lab. And as you can see, we don't actually have a name for it yet. So I've just got a placeholder there. I'm very open to suggestions. So if you have any ideas during the presentation, please let me know at the end. So just a little outline of what we're talking about today. I want to discuss a little bit about why we might need a new method by describing a common research scenario that I'm sure we're all familiar with. And then I'll explain why the current methods we have are not particularly well equipped to deal with it. Then I'll talk about the method itself and the design rationale for each of the phases of this technique. And then I'll use an example of a recent project we did in which the method was used. And then finally, I'll speak a little bit about how we'd like to pursue further research into this method in the future. So we're all probably familiar with the following research scenario that has these 5 features. The first feature is that you might want to accurately report on what a group of experts collectively believe. So for example, you might ask a question like, according to experts, what is the most effective strategies for combating disinformation? Or according to experts, what are the best evidence practices for preventing something like self-harm and suicide? With all these questions, the focus isn't on building a consensus. Rather, we just want to report on what experts believe and the degree to which they believe. So the first feature of the scenario is that you want to report on what a group of experts collectively believe. The second feature is that the collective beliefs of the expert community are not currently well understood. So this is going to be the case in an emerging or understudied area. And it may not be clear to the experts themselves what their community actually believes. So the field of disinformation is a good example. Although disinformation itself isn't new, it is an emerging field or topic of research. And as of yet, a strong consensus on issues related to disinformation doesn't exist yet. So contrast this a little bit with something like climate science, where pretty much all the experts agree that the Earth is warming due to some sort of human activity. So in this scenario, it would make sense to ask experts to give judgments on, say, a predetermined topic. Say, estimate the warming effect over the next 5 years in centigrade or something. But unfortunately, most areas are not like climate science. They don't yet have an established kind of consensus that everyone agrees on. So it doesn't really make sense to ask to, the starting point of elicitation doesn't make sense to predetermine what will be discussed if the topic itself is not very well understood. This third feature of the research scenario that we're interested in is if the group of experts is scattered across disciplines and professions. And this is also going to be especially common with emerging and understudied areas. And the diversity of perspectives can make it really difficult and challenging to synthesize judgments into a coherent kind of result. And the fourth feature is that what you're after is qualitative rather than quantitative judgments. Most expert elicitation methods are not well suited to combining qualitative judgments. And this can become especially challenging if the cohort is from a diverse backgrounds. So if we have a lot of different perspectives and qualitative judgments, it can be very difficult to synthesize them. And then finally, the final feature of this research scenario is that you've got limited research. So this is limited resources. So this is nothing new. I'm pretty sure all research scenarios are like this, but it does mean that we need to kind of be aware of how long and how much it's going to cost to extract information from a group of experts. So that's the scenario that you might be familiar with, that you might come across in your work. And if you're in that scenario, you've got a couple of options. The first thing you could do would be to send out an opinion poll or a survey. So you want to know what a group of experts thinks, you could just survey them, send out an opinion poll. But there are a lot of problems with surveys, and two of the major ones in this context is that you only really get top-of-the-head judgments. And you have no real way of ensuring that respondents actually understand the questions or the task. So to give an extreme example, there's the dihydrogen monoxide pranks, or the hoaxes that you might have heard of. So people are informed that there's this dangerous chemical this chemical rather called dihydrogen monoxide that happens to be found in everything. And then they ask, what should we do about this chemical? And by and large, the vast majority of people say that they want to ban dihydrogen monoxide. Of course, they're completely unaware that dihydrogen monoxide is just water. And so they presumably don't actually want to ban it. They just don't know that it is water. So this is the kind of top-of-the-head judgment that you see in opinion polls. They aren't what the respondent really believes. As I said, nobody really wants to ban water. They just don't know dihydrogen monoxide is water. The other problem with surveys or opinion polls is that you get typically very low response rates. Online polls are something like 44%. So you could conduct a survey, but there's some serious drawbacks, or you could conduct a focus group. And this kind of solves the problem of a top-of-the-head judgment. You get a little bit of a chance to deliberate and discuss. But as soon as you do that, you come into a host of other issues. So in particular, they cost a lot, especially if it's face-to-face. You've got to pay for everyone to come and assemble in a room. And they can be often derailed by group dynamics. I'm sure we've often seen in these kind of situations where the loudest person in the group tends to be what the group believes. And it can be really difficult to effectively synthesize these judgments in this kind of situation. And then finally, you've got something like a Delphi method, which is a structured elicitation method. Delphis are not derailed by group dynamics, but they do have their own kind of issues. They also can cost a lot, especially if consensus is the goal of the Delphi. Delphi methods tend to continue until consensus is reached, so that can take a long time. They also don't offer any chance to deliberate. Of course, there's a notable exception called the IDEA protocol, which was also developed at CEBRA. That does give the participants a chance to discuss and deliberate, but that method is mainly dealing with quantitative judgments rather than qualitative judgments. So most Delphi variants are not particularly well suited to combining qualitative judgments. So if you wanted to know what a group of experts collectively believe, you've got a few options. They all have serious drawbacks. Despite the drawbacks, though, Delphi probably gets us closest to where we want to be. And there are many Delphi variants, but all of them will share these common features. One, they will oppose some level of anonymity at various stages in the process, and they do this to mitigate unwanted psychological effects. The process is iterative. It takes place over multiple rounds, and it allows experts to revise their responses. The process will also use controlled feedback so that experts can see the responses of others. And finally, the process is statistically summarized in some way at the end. And these features bring a lot of benefits to any structured kind of elicitation method that you're doing. But going into what they are and how they work is a little bit beyond the scope of this presentation. Instead, I'll just move on to describing our Delphi variant. We designed a method to retain the good bits of the Delphi while overcoming the drawbacks, we hope. Our process unfolds over 3 phases, and I'll discuss these in depth next. The first phase is a generate phase, where we ask experts themselves to provide responses to targeted open-ended questions. We then draft what we call synthesis statements that reflect the major themes emerging from the responses to this first survey. We then have a second phase, which is called phase 2, discuss. And this is where experts can discuss the results of phase 1, share information and arguments, and hopefully come to a shared understanding of the topic. Finally, we have phase 3, assess, where we ask experts to indicate their level of agreement with the synthesis statements discussed in phase 2. So as you can see, our process also shares this hard core of the Delphi method. We always impose anonymity in the first round. The process is iterative, obviously. We've got 3 phases. It uses controlled feedback in the form of the discussion, and the responses are statistically summarized at the end. So we've kind of retained all the good bits, but we've added a couple of things. We've added a generate phase at the beginning and a discussion phase. So the first phase of our method is dedicated to exploring the landscape of beliefs held by the expert community. And this is unlike most other Delphi methods, where the topics or items are set in advance, and there is only really one kind of response allowed. So this is going to be the case for almost all qualitative Delphi types. The first ever Delphi investigated the strategic and tactical effectiveness of nuclear weapons and just asked the experts to give a numerical response to how many atom bombs are required to reduce munitions output by a prescribed amount. So you can see, like, there's no option there if the experts wanted to say something like, well, I don't really think we should be using atom bombs at all. This is the worst way to reduce munitions output. They're only allowed to give one particular response, a number, to the question. So the other kind is like a ranking type Delphi, where experts are asked to rate rate a predetermined set of items. So an example here is that there was a recent Delphi on opioid use management, where they asked the experts to rate the appropriateness of the following opioid management strategies. So that's how most other Delphi methods start. Ours is a little different. We, in our most recent exercise, asked 3 open-ended but targeted questions. And these are, what are up to 5 effective strategies for combating disinformation? What are up to 5 major barriers to combating disinformation? And what are up to 5 promising areas for future research in the area? So these are open-ended questions, but they're targeted, so they're not completely free-form responses. But they are free text responses, and they're limited to 350 characters. So why do we have an exploratory first phase? Well, in scenarios with this feature too, right, the collective beliefs of the expert community are not currently well understood. We recognize that predetermining any set of topics or list of items is going to be prohibitively challenging. So that is, how are we supposed to predetermine a list that will be discussed in the Delphi if one doesn't exist? In some sense, to start a Delphi with a predetermined set of topics, those topics must already exist somewhere in the literature. Otherwise, it would be very difficult or perhaps impossible to adequately justify why you made the list the way you did. So we thought if we wanted to accurately report on what a group collectively believes, we should probably first just ask them for their range of beliefs. So once we receive the results to our phase 1 generate survey in the form of free text responses, we need to analyze them. And we do this by sorting all the responses expressing essentially the same point into affinity groups. So this is just basic kind of thematic coding, but we use a process that streamlines it somewhat. and makes it take less time, I guess. Once the responses are grouped and cross-checked, we draft what we call synthesis statements, and they represent the content of each of these affinity groups. Now, a synthesis statement is a propositional claim, and that it's capable of being true or false. It's not a declaration, like let's go to the mall, or a question like should we go to the mall. It's a claim that can be readily argued for or against. And this really helps facilitate the next phase where they will be discussing these synthesis statements. Because they're of a propositional form, you can easily say, yes, I agree with it, no, I don't, and why. So our second phase is a distinct discussion phase where experts can engage with the synthesis statements emerging from phase one and engage with other experts. And this is actually a major departure from most Delphi designs, IDEA protocol accepted. They were designed to solve the problem of problematic interactions that were occurring in committee processes. And their solution was just to get rid of all the interaction. So you can see there, I think this is probably throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and we'll see why in a second. We went the other way. So in the second phase of our process, we have a distinct discussion phase that's facilitated on an online platform. We use this Lumio platform at the moment because it offers a self-contained space to discuss each of these statements. You can impose anonymity. It's off the shelf and pretty inexpensive. It's asynchronous, so people can contribute from anywhere in the world at any time. And it has a robust notification system, which is incredibly important, especially if the discussion becomes quite robust or quite detailed. Then people need to be able to keep track of what's happened and when. And Lumio allows for all of that. So why a discussion phase? Well, as I said, with throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I really think that depriving a process like this of expert interaction is damaging, or it's depriving the process of major epistemic advantages. If you allow experts to come together and discuss, they can share arguments and evidence for or against the synthesis statements. They can get exposed to different perspectives, especially outside their own discipline. They can challenge the assumption held by other experts. They can resolve ambiguities as well. So facilitating a discussion allows us to mitigate the challenges that arise in scenarios where experts across disciplines and professions, and we are asking for qualitative rather than quantitative judgment. So that's scenarios with feature 3 and 4. So feature 3 is that the group of experts is scattered across professions. So to deal with that, we needed some way for experts to reach a shared understanding or impart their perspective to others. And finally, the feature 4, when we were after qualitative rather than quantitative judgments. This makes it there's much more room, for misinterpretation or misunderstanding when you're dealing with qualitative judgments. So that's why we decided to include a discussion phase. It offered major epistemic advantages and helped to mitigate some of the effects that arise from dealing with research scenarios with feature 3 and 4. So this is kind of what it looks like on the discussion phase. Hopefully you can see that. You may not need to read the text there, but the page on the left is the home page where all the synthesis statements can be accessed. They can be arranged with broad topics as well, so you can tag and filter them. Each statement gets its own self-contained space to discuss it and some general guidance on how to do so. We tend to leave the forum open for 10 days to cover a weekend and give everyone the chance to contribute or review the discussions. And after the discussion phase, we may revise the synthesis statements to reflect changes suggested in the discussion. So on the right there, we've got the a synthesis statement regarding regulation, enforcement, and penalties. And you can see that the synthesis statement is in bold there and the discussion is threaded underneath. Our final phase is pretty standard for any Delphi variant. We send out a final survey, but it's designed so that responses can be statistically summarized in some way. This is the same as most other Delphi methods where participants are asked to indicate their level of agreement. And if required, we also can ask them to rank revised statements according to some criteria. But we think that by using synthesis statements throughout the process, if experts won't have to shift reference frames in each of the phases, and this will help to keep things streamlined. So they're dealing with the same things from the discussion phase and the assess phase. They don't have to switch modes of thinking. So the end result of our process looks something like this. we have a set of statements, synthesis statements, that are collectively endorsed by the expert community alongside their levels of endorsement. The top chart is one of the results we obtained when using our process to investigate the nature of analytic rigor in intelligence analysis. So you can see here that each of the things there kind of creates a synthesis statement. So an important purpose of analytic rigor is to increase correctness or accuracy in judgments. And that had a large block of agreement, 91.7% either strongly agree, somewhat agree, or neither. So we can see that most of the experts collectively endorse that an important purpose of analytic rigor is to increase correctness or accuracy in judgments. And it's the same with the one below. If you read what's in each of the lines in the chart, that completes the sentence at the top. So the ones in the below are the results of a project we ran to identify effective strategies for combating disinformation. And I'll talk a little bit about that project in a moment. So just to recap, there's a common research scenario that existing expert elicitation methods are ill-equipped to deal with. Delphi designs come closest, but aren't great for qualitative judgments. We designed a novel Delphi variant that retains the beneficial features and unfolds over 3 phases. We've got a generate phase where experts generate the topics that will be considered, the discussion phase where they get to discuss those, and then finally the assess phase where they get to indicate their level of agreement with them. And this gives us the considered collective view of the expert community. So up until now, we've used the method on 4 different research projects. In 2020, we used the method to investigate the nature of analytic rigor in intelligence analysis. In 2021, we helped evaluate the Department of Health's Better Access initiative. This was what they put in place during the pandemic to get everyone better access to mental health. So we were invited to help evaluate whether or not that was effective. In 2022, we used the technique in a similar way to inform the development of Australia's National Suicide Prevention Strategy. And what I'll speak about now is our most recent exercise, where we use the method to explore how to combat and/or build resilience to disinformation, misinformation, and malign influence. I'll refer to that from now on as DMMI. So, phase 1 of our process. We managed to recruit 66 experts in the field from a wide variety of professions, disciplines, and geographies. We then asked them 3 targeted questions, soliciting free text responses with a 350 character max. That character limit helps ensure that the responses remain focused and the analysis phase is manageable. If we allowed for open-ended responses of any length, then analyzing them would become impossible. So we received 791 responses to those 3 questions. And after analysis, that turned into 84 themes, which then were transformed into 84 synthesis statements in preparation for phase 2. So phase 2 was where experts could discuss the synthesis statements from phase 1. There were approximately 250 comments generated in the discussion phase across all the pages. And here is just one example of the kind of discussion we see during the exercise. And I think it shows the phase working exactly as intended. Can everyone see that on the right there? Can you read the text? Maybe just a thumbs up if you can. Yep, cool. This is just the example. So this was a discussion around the worsening political or ideological polarization being a barrier to combating DMMI. I think I was muted for some reason. One expert suggested that polarization is stable, has always been around, and is actually a natural part of our society. In response, several other experts shared empirical evidence that effective polarization really is getting worse. And following that exchange, questions were asked of that shared evidence, including how generalizable it is and whether it is really measuring the right kind of polarization. So as intended, the discussion allowed ambiguities in the topic to be brought up, potential resolutions shared and scrutinized. Without that opportunity, the expert who doubted polarization was getting worse would have really struggled to evaluate how much of a barrier it really was. But with the discussion, the expert was able to clarify their understanding, and which will hopefully allow for a more nuanced evaluation in the final phase. Just to be sure, the benefit of the discussion is shared by all who read it. even if it had little effect on the expert who first believed that polarization was stable. If one expert had that perspective, it's likely others do too. And simply by reviewing the exchange, those other experts have the same opportunity to improve their understanding as well. So here are the results of the first broad topic, effective strategies for combating DMMI. These are the 5 statements describing strategies that receive the highest level of endorsement from our experts. And hopefully you can see how using synthesis statements throughout the process helps to streamline it. The same synthesis statements discussed in phase 2 can, as propositional statements, be more easily evaluated using a Likert scale than something like a non-propositional claim. So those are the 5 effective strategies. The first was investing in research, which seems kind of a no-brainer. The second was educating and raising awareness. The third was to establish a robust regulatory framework for social media. The fourth was to improve media information literacy. And the fifth was improving support and outreach to communities most affected by DMMI. These are the results for our second question. These are the 5 barriers to combating or building resilience to DMMI with the highest impact. So as you can see, these are all synthesis statements again. Each of the bar descriptions completes the sentence at the top. We can see that the increasing use of DMMI by malicious state actors is significantly impacting combating or building resilience to DMMI. Our final result is, I just wanted to share because it's a bit of a different exercise. So instead of asking people to indicate their agreement with a synthesis statement, we asked them to select from a list of areas for future research that were generated in phase 1, those areas that they thought should be prioritized for the next 5 years. So we can see here that these areas for future research were marked as a top 5 priority higher than any others in proportion to the others. So we see here that research is needed in a whole bunch of areas. I think the entire list was something like 50 research areas, and it just necessitated a slightly different approach to evaluating the synthesis statements rather than Likert scales. There were too many, so we decided to do a ranking exercise instead. So those are the results. Where to next for the method? Well, it needs to be properly validated, and we can do this by comparing the results of our method to another. We want to also try and integrate AI into the qualitative and aspect of the process. This will help reduce the cost and time it takes to run the exercise. So we can get AI, a large language model or something like that, to do the qualitative analysis of the responses from phase 1. That'll make the process much quicker. And ideally, we'd like to build a platform that can house kind of all the aspects of this process, so experts don't have to switch platforms at each stage. And a dedicated platform could be integrated with AI and any quantitative analysis as well to provide kind of real-time results to the participants. We also need a new name. So here are some ideas that we had. ChatGPT came up with a few of them. I don't know how good they are. We've got the PEAS protocol, the expert guides process, and Grail. There was another one, I think, but I didn't include that, the GIMP process. You can probably guess why I didn't. Also, finally, we do run this process as a service. So I'll just quickly do the short sales pitch. There's a lot of advantages to doing it, to taking our process. It generates a collective view, which consists of a set of statements strongly endorsed by the expert group. It's efficient. It takes less than a month in the expert participation stage, with a modest minimum time commitment from the participants. It's dependable in the sense that it smoothly and reliably generates a high quality collective view. It's scalable, can accommodate a large and diverse expert group. It's accessible entirely online using familiar, easy to use tools. It can be anonymous so that controversial viewpoints can be surfaced without adverse consequences. It can integrate perspectives from different expert communities. And finally, it is relatively inexpensive since it avoids the costs associated with face-to-face meetings. So that's it. It was kind of short and sweet. I would be more than happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thanks very much, Dr. Kruger. That was excellent. And I think if you just have a look in the chat field, I might just read out a few of those while we're waiting for others. Don't be shy. If you want, put your hand up. You can ask questions. But first one was just at the top there from Kim Johnston. Were you able to do any qualitative analysis on changes to expert positions between phase 2 and 3? And did exposure to new research or nuanced positions impact the expert judgment? Thanks.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. If we did have more money, I would have loved to have done that. But unfortunately, the projects that we've run these exercises on are quite limited in funding, so there's not a lot of scope to do any additional kind of analysis or research. I would love to actually do that to see if we could identify actual instances of experts changing their mind. And by how much and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so great question. I would have loved to have an answer for you, but unfortunately I don't.
Thanks, and thanks to Morgan, I think, has provided a bit of context there around some further information. So thank you. Anchor's come up with a good one, I think, in terms of just the name. G'day.
I like it. Thank you, Anchor.
I do. I've got a Star Wars background. Love it. Another one down here, Anchor continued on, is how does validation work if there's no ground truth?
Yeah, another good question. I suspect that we'd be validating it kind of with respect to other versions rather than with respect to a ground truth. For a lot of these topics, it's going to be difficult to get a ground truth. So if we had the question like, what is an effective strategy for combating disinformation? What's the ground truth for that? It would be hard to say. So I think the best we could do for validation would be to run a similar technique on the same set of questions and see if the results that we get are more enlightening or more insightful or something like that.
Perfect. And I did like the fact you'd been using ChatGPT to come up with some good ideas as well for the naming convention just on that. A good one here from Kim. Using AI/ML as an analysis tool in the expert dialogue space, would you use something like a sandbox setup? And if not, what would you use? Or what would you consider?
I'm not quite sure what the sandbox setup is. So something where you can just play around with, there's no consequences? Is that kind of the idea?
I don't know, Kim, if you're there, if you want to talk about it, but my understanding with sort of sandboxes where they're sort of sequestered away, so they're not, you don't have access to full production environment, things like that, so you can do it in isolation, play around with your AI.
Then yes. Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Hang on,
so
sorry,
I was just
Kim.
going to say, Rich is largely right, but I think one of the potential problems with AI is that if you're pulling it in out of the overall model, it's going to completely dilute an expert position because it just brings in every piece of rubbish that exists in the AI space.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So we would need to kind of, I guess, maybe even build our own or build some sort of model that doesn't get caught up in all the rest of the bullshit, but just focuses on the qualitative results that we have.
Great. Thank you, Kim. And there's a couple more coming through. Don't forget, you can also use, I think up the top there, you can raise your hand, virtual hand, if you've got any other questions, or just put them in the chat field. It's quite easy to read through here. Graciela, you mentioned anonymity in the last slide, or one of the last slides. Does it influence the contents of the statements, for example, making them more aggressive? If not anonymous, would people change their behaviour, making some less inclined to criticise others or put up their viewpoints?
Yeah, I think that's a distinct possibility. There are different kind of degrees of anonymity you can impose, but it's always, in any Delphi method, that first stage is always anonymous. So you never know who generated what item from that initial phase. Does it influence the contents of the statements, making them more aggressive? That's a good question. I don't think so. So in all the ones we've run, we've had a couple where the discussion phase has been completely anonymous, which means that people join using a pseudonym and an avatar, and they don't share any personal information about themselves. But we've also had a discussion phase where people are not anonymous, where they've decided to, if they want, they can use their title and their name. But I don't think in both of those cases, I haven't seen any difference in the aggressiveness, I guess, of the responses. So perhaps it doesn't make a difference.
No, but good question nonetheless. One here from, I think this is Rupert. Do you have a sense about what the minimum number of participants should be? In many cases, the number of experts can be quite low, e.g. 5 to 10.
Yes. So in the minimum we've had is about 44. I probably wouldn't want to go any less than that. I don't have like an exact minimum number to give you, but it's certainly the case that the more experts you have, the more opportunity they have to actually discuss the statements and the more robust that discussion will be. And I think the more of that you can do, the better the end result will be. So I don't think we could run the process with 5 or 10. I would say you would need a minimum of at least 20 to 30. But it also depends a lot on what the questions you are asking are. If you've got 3 questions like we had and you can enter up to 5 responses for each of them, you're going to need a lot of people to discuss all those different statements. But if you have, like, say, one targeted question and you're only soliciting, say, 2 or 3 responses, then you could potentially get away with a lot less of an expert panel.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for that question. And I guess that also goes to, in this busy day and age, trying to also find a suitable number of experts to be able to spend the time on this as well can be a bit of a challenge as well, isn't it? Depending on the volume and what you want to go through. But thank you for those putting in the questions. Got a couple more here. Claire, what tools / resources / software, if you can tell us, did you use to identify the responses to the questions into themes, and how labour intensive was this part of the analysis?
Sure, thanks, Claire. That's a great question. We use a platform called Trello. You might be familiar with it. It's basically you get a page with a lot of cards. And so what we do is we put each of the responses as a separate card in a Trello space, and then we can kind of move, drag, and drop it into different affinity groups. We do this all by hand, so it is labor intensive. There's no real way around it unless we got AI to do it. It does take a while, but using this Trello method, we can do it in about 2 or 3 days.
Next one just coming through here is from you. What are the likely processes and references for validation?
References, I'm not sure.
Are you online? Do you want to just elaborate if you're there?
Yeah, what are standards, or how can you compare? Yeah, the basis for comparison to say this is better than that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. So we haven't really looked into it too much, but my general idea is to pretty much run a bog standard Delphi method or something like that using the same kind of questions and just compare the results, see if we get any more insight into what the questions were and whether or not the discussion phase actually managed to change people's minds. I think those are the 2 things that if we could figure out, we'd be able to say we had we're on the way to validation. But as I guess Anka mentioned earlier, we don't have that ground truth. We can't say, this is validated because they got the answer right. It's not going to work like that, I'm afraid.
True. Any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to. I think we've got a couple just coming through now. Apologies, my system's a bit like me, old and slow. Ankar, is the discussion stage monitored and or facilitated?
Very lightly. It's very lightly facilitated, but it is actively monitored. So we give like a tiny little bit of guidance for the discussion. So what you should do, what you shouldn't do. There's also like a code of conduct or something, so you can't call people names. But yes, the researchers as well, we do monitor it. And if it looks like there's not enough discussion, what we can do is we can seed comments and we can seed little things to get the discussion going. So in that kind of sense, if needed, we can kind of jump in and steer it. But in general, we haven't actually needed to at all. I think we've commented maybe once or twice on the most recent exercises, but
Yep.
otherwise things just kind of seem to go on their own.
Good question. One that's come through here from Ian is, what do you think are the limitations to the method?
Yeah, yes, a great question. The limitations, I think, are we don't get discussion on every synthesis statement. So when you look at like, at the end of the discussion phase, it's not going to be the case that everything has been discussed and critiqued and scrutinized. So I think one of the severe limitations is that, we can't get everyone to kind of talk about everything. How much that limits it, I'm not too sure. Some of the other limitations are obviously the time and effort that it takes to do this exercise. It puts a lot of people off. Although we, as I said, we do make quite a lot of effort to minimize the amount of time required from the experts. It still is a major limitation, yeah.
That's great. Now, look, feel free. We've got a couple more minutes. Put your hands up. Turn your camera on if you want to ask any questions. Thank you, Kim. With increasing demands for evaluation as part of Commonwealth new funding, do you see a potential for this modified Delphi process or Delphi process being used for program and or policy design and or evaluation planning in the government space?
Yes, it already has. I'm not too sure what the Commonwealth new funding stuff is, but we have used the project now on two government projects. One was that Better Health Initiative. So that was government policy to increase the access to mental health services. So we used our process with, I think it was about 80 mental health experts across the world to kind of, but mainly based in Australia, to evaluate the success of that initiative and whether and what elements of it should be retained going forward. And that was put into a big report that was submitted to government a couple of years ago. I'm not sure what became of it, but it certainly did inform what aspects of that initiative to retain going forward. The other one we've done that I mentioned briefly was about Australia's National Suicide Prevention Strategy. So yeah, that was looking to inform its development. So we got a whole bunch of mental health experts together again, and we asked them to think about effective strategies, I guess, for reducing the risk of self-harm and suicide. We all collated that into a set of what we called evidence briefs that were then submitted to the department to help them put together the suicide prevention strategy. So yeah, I do see a massive potential for this being used in policy design and evaluation. That's kind of where it's aimed at, and hopefully that's where we'll see it used in the future.
Kim, was there anything else that you wanted to add? I'm assuming there you're talking about new funding coming in through like new policy proposals or MPPs, but was there anything else there that you wanted to clarify, or you're comfortable with that?
No, that's fabulous. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Rupert, good question. Are you open to receiving an email seeking some guidance on a small project?
Absolutely. I am open 24/7. Whenever you'd like to get in touch, please do.
Excellent. You have the contact details there. I think I saw a hand up, but it might have come through as a question now. Is that you, Graciela? Do you want to?
Yes, it's me,
Go for it.
Ariel. Thank you. That great presentation. I'm just interested on understanding better also how difficult it has been for you to get the right set of people. So my question is, did you pay experts? How you get the right experts, and how difficult has been compared to other methods? As you pointed in your opening, the amount of people that you send surveys and respond is so small. So do you think that this is a better way to engage with the right people, and how, if you could share with us, what is your success story in doing that?
Sure. We don't give them anything. We don't pay the experts a cent. One of the things we did about 5 or so years ago, we were part of what we called the Swarm project, which was building a collaborative reasoning platform for intelligence analysis. And the experimentation we did at that platform, we realized that if you recruit people with the right what's the marketing term? Value proposition. You're able to actually get a lot out of them without paying them anything, which sounds kind of shit. But if you frame the exercise in a way that they are actually contributing to the research itself, they're much more inclined to participate. The second thing is that if you make the exercise more engaging, then you're also going to get more participation. And one of the key things to make something more engaging is to do it with others. So a discussion phase, we find actually the prospect of that makes it a lot more interesting for prospective experts. And we haven't had much issue recruiting at all over the 4 projects that we've done. Admittedly, for 2 of them, the government projects, the experts were selected in advance, so we didn't do the recruitment for that. But for the other 2, we just did the basic emailing experts that we thought would be good. We looked at citations of relevant articles and emailed those authors. We did that sort of snowball thing where they could email other researchers that they knew in the network. So in the end, we used quite a broad definition of the term expert. We don't make any kind of say you had to have been in the business for 5 years or something. We don't do any of that. Basically, if you self-identify as an expert, that's probably okay. And if you received an invitation from us, you're expert enough. But critically, we don't pay the experts anything, and they seem to be wanting to be part of the experience. So yeah, I think it's a much better way than a traditional survey.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Graciela. That was a really good question. Anka, again, do more analysts work on the themes identification sorted on Trello? I think that was the system you mentioned. And if so, do you look at any measure of inter-rater reliability?
Yep. We definitely should, Anka, but we haven't. Again, this is a kind of like a resource thing. Do more analysts work on the themes identification? Analysts?
Sorry, we got a bit of feedback there. I might just try and mute that. There we go. Go for it.
Sorry. Do more analysts work on the themes? Do you mean researchers? So yes. So at least 2 will do the sorting. We definitely should be looking at things like inter-rater reliability. But unfortunately, yeah, we just have run out of time and funding for those kind of things.
Okay, go for it. I see you've got your hand up if there's anything you want to add there.
I think Anka's offering to do it for us.
No, I just pressed the wrong button. I just wanted to do the.
No, we took that as a yes. That's
okay,
it.
Thank you, Anka.
Happy to help.
Sure, anytime.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. So, all right, we're just at the tail end. Any last questions? Either put your hand up or chuck it in the comments field. Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up. And I can see just while you may be thinking about that, Dr. Krieger did mention how to get in contact. You've got his details down there as well. So feel free to reach out if there's interest or you know anyone who would like to help. I can't see any more hands up, and I think we've done well. So I think we're going to call it there. Just before we do, Rupert has asked if we could get a copy.
Sure. Should I send that to you, Rich? You can distribute, or I can send it straight to Rupert?
Yeah. No. Anne and Lisa will make that arrangements there as well. So they'll make sure that goes out to everyone who is either interested or on the mailing list. I think we'll work that out. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to everyone today. And thanks everyone for coming.
Look, on behalf of everyone else, thank you very much today, Dr. Krieger. Excellent presentation. Lots of interesting and diverse sort of question sets that have come through there. As everyone would be aware, it is recorded. So at the end of this session, it will be made available for everyone. And in case you missed it, you can go back and rewatch it. So thank you very much. For our next CEBRAnar, just thought I'd flag this in advance, bit of forward advertising here. The next CEBRAnar will be on Tuesday, 3rd of September at 11 o'clock. And we've got Professor Tom Compass and Dr. Edith Arndt and Dr. Tracy Hollings on the topic of valuing the impact of Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, biosecurity research to Australia and the region. So that will be on Tuesday, 3rd of September. Invites and information will go out. But just before we close, thank you to Dr. Kruger. Thanks for the team as well for making this all run so smoothly. And thank you to everyone else for attending. If you've got other people you know who might be interested, feel free to forward on the invites. Everyone's welcome to attend. So thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Kruger. I'll let you go.
Thanks, everyone.